This is Sonia Wagner representing PCA families in one of our recordings that capture lived experience and best practice research-based learning that assists kinship, permanent and adoptive parents and carers in supporting young people. PCA families has zero tolerance of child abuse. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet and pay respect to elders past and present and express our intention to move together to a place of justice and partnership. Today, we are discussing emotional literacy and the traumatised child with Chrissie Davies from Chaos to Calm. Welcome, Chrissie.
Hello.
Chrissie has over 20 years experience working with children and families as a teacher in the school classroom, working with extreme behaviours, and as a mother of 2 young children. Chrissie has a wealth of knowledge to share. What else do we need to know about you, Chrissie?
Well, we're specifically talking about emotional intelligence and literacy today, and that is my jam. It is such a big part of my philosophy. It's everything that I live and breathe and share with families, and never more so important for our trauma kids, adoptive and permanent care kids, because boy, do they have some big emotions.
Yes, for sure. So we've had a few conversations with other parents and carers and professionals about the value of therapeutic parenting, and I know you're passionate about that. So
Yes.
What are the steps parents really need to know or learn about from your perspective?
Absolutely. It is a really big part of my philosophy, the therapeutic approach. Obviously, having worked with so many traumatized children throughout my career in education, it is a very specific understanding, first and foremost, the philosophy of really getting your head around why we use this approach, because we really understand that kids who've been exposed to trauma of varying degrees display some very specific and challenging behaviours, opposition, aggression, lots of those things. And whilst most kids do display those things within the realm of normal, development, a lot of our trauma kids sort of take that to the next level, don't they? So we have got to have a really good philosophy based on empathy and understanding where those behaviours are coming from and why. And a really big part of the therapeutic approach is following what we call the PACE method, or the analogy, PACE, standing for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. And when we use those core values in our approach with our children, playfulness in particular, oh my goodness, that goes a long way with my little guy in particular. I can normally get him over the line with a little bit of humour. The acceptance, obviously, we spoke about already, of understanding what our kids have already been through and how their brains have been impacted, either through developmental trauma, generational trauma, or lived experience themselves in separation from their birth families. Curiosity into, always questioning and being curious about where that behaviour is coming from. And then empathy, of course, really having solid empathy and understanding for why our children do the things they do. Because when you find that, when you have that empathy, you're a lot more patient.
Oh, yes.
You need in spades, and you're a lot more understanding too.
Yes. True.
So what I do with, we follow the PACE approach, and I guess what sets therapeutic parenting apart from more traditional parenting methods is that we don't believe in using punishments or consequences specifically, and I really err away from rewards as well, which I'll explain a little bit more about, because we really want to help our kids who have got some challenges around identity and self-worth and self-belief, that being who they are, truly learning to love themselves and accept themselves, is what they actually need to be successful in life. And that doesn't come from giving them a lollipop every time to get them over the line, right?
Yes. Yeah. Which is kind of our judgment of them, right? So,
yes,
yeah.
For sure. And I'm certainly not saying I haven't given my kids a snake.
Oh, yeah.
Every now and then. Maybe on public transport when you can't get off. But we don't want that to be our central focus, right? So a lot of the traditional methods come back to control and shaping behaviour through using external methods like stickers and prizes and rewards, and removing our love when our children do something that we don't like. Right?
Yes, absolutely. It's a little bit like that argument around pocket money and whether it is tied to jobs or not. Yeah.
Absolutely. So interconnected. Yeah.
Mm,
I actually run a whole workshop on intrinsic motivation as well, if anyone's interested. But
great.
it is about doing that deep inner core work with our kids, isn't it? Which we know with our trauma kids takes a lot of time, a lot of practice, a lot of stuff ups, a lot of reparation.
Yes.
A lot of accepting that they're making mistakes, and that's okay. We still love you anyway. It's what you do next time that's most important.
Yeah, it's not the most efficient parenting. It takes time. So it takes a lot of leaning in and curiosity and empathy,
absolutely.
as you say. So
And the other really big part of the philosophy that I teach centers around using music.
Yes, great.
Creativity and art, so art therapy, and making a really big commitment to spend time in nature with your children.
Great. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Love nature. So calming.
Oh, amazing. So incredible. And it was so interesting, with being explorers and getting out and being curious and all those sorts of things, how much, all children respond. And, I'm in the business now teaching everybody how to use the therapeutic approach, not just trauma families, or kids with challenging behaviours, because the truth is all children respond so incredibly well to this approach.
Yes, very true. So I remember once being told by a paediatrician that I needed to put a little plastic toy in my child's pram. But my approach was to give them pieces of nature as we walked, right? So he didn't know I was actually giving them leaves and other things to kind of explore. I'm pretty passionate about the whole nature aspect. So fresh air and all of that. So I guess it's an important model. And does it work for all children, or is it particularly relevant for children with trauma?
Well, it's particularly relevant for children with trauma, but I'll never forget, and here's a really clear example about how it works for all children, because I predominantly spent most of my career in special education, where there was major blow-ups daily and, lots of really intense, challenging behaviours.
Yes.
I remember moving back to a mainstream school, and I had this beautiful little Prep 1 class, and oh my goodness, my heart, honestly, and I remember feeling for the first time, oh my goodness, this is what it's actually like to teach, not just crowd control,
Yes.
Because it was really challenging, obviously, in those specialist settings. But I use my whole therapeutic approach, use circle time, growth mindset, and oh my goodness, it was phenomenal to see those children without the neurological disruption that our kids have thrive under that approach.
Wow.
It was truly phenomenal. And this was part of my real understanding about how this really works. So it's so beneficial to all children. Our kids and autistic kids and our beautiful little ADHD kids, they've got a lot of interference that we've got to work through. But for our neurotypical kids who just plodding along through life, just usual ups and downs, they just eat this philosophy up. Honestly, it is incredible.
Great. Brilliant. And I guess touching on some of those things, I'm wondering if you can maybe comment on a few scenarios and how you might approach things. These are sort of the common things that come up for parents. So some of those things would be like refusal to go to bed or shower, nightmares, emotional upsets, those salty moods, or even depression, maybe losing a battle for the TV remote, all those common kind of day. And then, self-regulation is something that comes up a lot. Problems forming attachments, which might even be disassociation at times. So, so I'm wondering, perhaps you could comment on approach you might take with some of those things.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, a really big part of my philosophy and what I teach families, Sonia, too, is always to connect before you direct. So making sure that, and if we come back to that really big understanding that we're not in it to control our children, we're here to guide them and teach them and come alongside them rather than control them. Any of those situations, like most families have challenges with their kids, getting them into the shower or getting them into bed and, all those sorts of things. And, I often say to families, it's not actually about that task. It's actually about them following the instruction or the internal motivation to do the job that we're asking them to do. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I really recommend to families is thinking about, so for example, with the having a shower, you know, like Groundhog Day for kids, you know,
Yes.
they don't like doing the same thing all the time. We know that, right? Is be relaxed about it. So sometimes my daughter will say, I don't feel like a shower tonight. I'm like, yeah, okay, no problem. Don't sweat it.
Yep.
How about you have one in the morning?
Mm-hmm.
Flexibility.
Mm-hmm.
Relinquish control.
Mm-hmm.
Not everything has to be done the same every single day. And the number one thing I see with families and children in particular is patterns in behaviour forming when we get stuck in doing the same thing every single day, because our children become complacent, they become comfortable, and then we start to see a little bit more pushback. So trying to change things up and be a bit more flexible in our approach goes a really long way.
Okay. Yeah.
So really good, one of my favorite strategies is connect before you direct. So for example, if you're asking your kids to set the table and they're like, no, it's not my turn, I did it yesterday, yada, yada, yada. What my go-to strategy is always is to give them a big hug, give them a snuggle, tell them something amazing about themselves, and then just say, you know what, it'd be really great if you could help me out with the table or whatever.
Yes.
And 9 times out of 10, that gets my kids over the line.
Yes. Yeah.
Because we're drawing them into the family, we're drawing them into the connection. You know, it's not just about, and I use this philosophy, in our family, we help each other out.
Yes.
Our love doesn't come with conditions. When you're part of a team, everybody contributes.
Yes. Yes.
So I feel like that philosophy is really important, as well as listening to our children and understanding. Obviously they're not going to have a shower for a week. It's becoming a problem. But I often say to families, give it a go. I bet you they don't.
Yes.
Because so much about what our children want from us is to be heard.
Yes.
To be valued and respected and listened to,
Yes.
And especially with a lot of, kids from a trauma background where control is a really big thing for them, isn't it? Because that's how they create that sense of safety for themselves.
Yes.
How can we allow our children to have that control, or some sort of control over their own life within our own personal boundaries?
Yes. Yes. And as you say, if you feel heard, you're a lot calmer as a person. So sometimes it is about handing over control. And I think even with my own older children, sometimes when I get that kind of saltiness, I'll just go, you need a mummy hug, and kind of, they're bigger than me now, right? So just kind of having a bit of fun.
Wait till they start doing your own strategies back at you. Sometimes when I'm feeling a bit agitated, my daughter goes, blow out the candles, Mum. Blow out the candles. Because that's one of my strategies that I've taught them. And it's so cute. And it just diffuses the moment. And we all have a laugh and move on, which is that playfulness that I was talking about.
Playfulness is so important. So, and I guess it is also a really long journey, and it happens a lot. And sometimes parents are wondering, when is this ever going to stop? When am I ever going to get off this kind of treadmill of these ups and downs all the time that, as you've said, can be quite extreme and quite exhausting. So is there a time frame? And I guess the other aspect to that is, do some of these labels matter to around ADHD and ASD, etc.?
I think the short answer is no.
Yeah.
And I think it is one of the things that we need to talk more about for prospective, adoptive and permanent care families. And it's almost like we don't want to scare them off, obviously, but I'm telling you now, you think the process is the challenging part? I'm here to tell you it's not. It's the lifelong commitment to these kids and whatever that brings into your life, right?
Yes.
And there is such a misconception out there in the community, and people say this to me all the time, but your children were babies when you adopted them and they've been with you in a loving, safe home all their life,
Yes.
How can they have challenges? And people don't understand generational trauma and the impacts of trauma in utero and fetal alcohol syndrome and all those sorts of things that we then go on to support our children through for many, many years,
Yes.
And yes, all families have challenges. And, often people would say, well, some families with biological children have kids with depression or autism. And, so it's about understanding that all these sorts of things happen to all kinds of families. It's not just trauma families, is it?
Yes.
I think the difference, we go into it knowing that there could be complexities, right?
Yes. Very true.
And I feel like in a way, permanent care and adoptive families are not given enough education and training around some of the challenges, which I feel like, you know, most people would know lived experience is the best training you can have when you're living it. But, you know, we're really given 3 days of training for permanent care, and then also you get these kids with all these complex needs, and you're left basically on your own to navigate, which is why this incredible resource that permanent care and adoptive families is creating is so helpful for families, right?
Yes.
Because
you don't
do we
always
go?
hear things when you're in that training moment. So I certainly didn't. So
that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. And it's even like, you know, anxiety. To other people looking in, anxiety just looks like challenging behavior or aggression, you know, and I feel like a big part of our role as adoptive and permanent care parents is accepting that we have to educate either our very close family, you know, people we're spending time with, and our friends, so that they can understand as well.
Yes.
Because they just don't see the behaviour in the same way as us.
Yes, very true. I think that relates to the schools as well. We could do more around emotions literacy at school, and maybe I can illustrate that with a personal example. So one of my children was sort of slammed on the front page of their grade 5 school report that was rating them on their sort of self-management and their resilience, etc. So now that child had lost a grandparent, a foster sibling, had moved schools, had a wrong eye muscle cut in an eye operation, had been in an ambulance twice, all in the space of a year, right? So there's multiple kind of things going on in the background. So that he was kind of managing, but it was coming out in, you know, some challenges in going into the school ground space. So, so that's where I think, you know, most adults would probably struggle with managing those kind of things. So he was turning up to school every day, and yet he was then also told in his report that he was doing terribly on the front page of his report. So my coping strategy is I no longer read school reports. So, but, you know, I took away that first page of the report, because from my perspective, the fact that he was going into the classroom was a sign that he was being resilient and managing what was going on for him. So I guess for me, I'd like to get your thoughts on sort of taking account of one's emotions and how we can bring that into the school environment a bit more effectively. So, and how do you assess children in that regard?
It's really interesting, and you know, I'm in a very fortunate position, aren't I, in terms of my brain, you know, that I've got the educated brain, all that knowledge, and then I've also got the lived experience of being a trauma parent, you know, such an incredibly unique skill set. And a really big part of, I think, the work that we have to do in education is educating our teachers about trauma, what that looks, sounds, and feels like for our kids. And talking about emotional intelligence is such an incredible skill for our children that can be taught through so many different things in education, in the way that we communicate and foster that growth mindset and resilience. Like, you look at school values, you know, they all have their school values that they focus on, those sorts of things. A lot of schools are doing a good job at looking at how, like, really investing in children long term, rather than just coping day to day with the behaviours and getting through the day. Do you know what I mean? Because at the end of the day, like, I mean, I talk to teachers all the time, Sonia, about this. It's like, oh, you are growing a human brain outside of the family unit. The next most trusted adult, apart from, you know, grandparents, is an educator.
Yes.
Do not take that responsibility lightly.
Yes.
It is a huge responsibility. And part of the challenge that we have, and I've seen this very commonly through the work that I do, is that, you know, whose responsibility is it
yes,
to teach this to a child or to teach that to a child? And I very strongly advocate to families that you are your child's first and most important educator, and that will never stop, even when they start school. So don't then start thinking that you can just start outsourcing this emotional intelligence, growth mindset, resilience, you know, bouncing back. All of that, the core values for our children, comes from the family home.
Yes. Yes.
Doesn't it? It's a
Absolutely.
part of their being. They're living and breathing human beings, is what they learn from the people that they live with,
Yes.
and what is role model to them in the family home.
Yes.
Teachers
Absolutely.
should build on and extend what our children are already bringing to the classroom.
Yes.
I passionately, strongly believe that.
Yes.
It is not a teacher's job to teach your child resilience. That comes from the family home. And yes, there will be situations at school where your child will need to show resilience and might need support from an educator. But a really big part of that will come home. And I've seen this with my own daughter, when she comes home with challenges at school. And I feel like a really big part of our job as parents is not to problem solve for our children,
Yes.
letting them sit in the uncomfortableness. And this is something that people find really hard.
Yes. Very true.
Children need to feel to learn. They've got to feel it and we are there to hold space and support them through it without problem solving and without making it disappear.
Yes. Yes. And trying to get them to come up with solutions.
Absolutely.
We can support the conversation, but
yeah, and it breaks my heart to hear, I've done so much work with my daughter on empowering her in situations at school, ask a teacher for help or tell the teacher what's going on. And then she finally does that. And then teacher says, oh, just go and work it out, girls. And they just dismiss,
Yes.
and this is what I mean. And then she comes home saying, Mom, I did all the things you asked me to do and no one listened to me.
Yes, yes.
So this is where we really need that teamwork, don't we? Of educators who understand that, yes, our children are bringing these values, and yes, school is a massive social experiment for our children. Let's not forget that. Part of that responsibility comes from teachers, building on those skills for our children.
Building on those emotions. So, and as you say, an example I always like to talk to is, as parents, like when we're out in a restaurant, we get the wrong meal delivered, right? It's how we respond to that is teaching our children so much about, resilience and how you speak with other people or how you manage the situations that you're in. So you can fall apart and, demand, that you want your right food and everything else, or you can take it as a teaching moment and,
And doesn't that comes back to that whole discussion that we had another time about our nervous system. So when we, display those behaviors to our children, it's the feeling that our children get. It's the energy that we give off that our children absorb and feel themselves. And so say, for example, being kind, when you do something kind for somebody, the brain releases a chemical called oxytocin, which makes you feel amazing.
Yes.
Right? And so when you do that, you feed off that and give off that energy, and your children see that and they feel that, and then they start to do it as well because it's been role model to them, and that's just the way you live your life. It's like, you go around yelling and screaming at kids all day. What do they project back to you?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. One of my favorite things is to watch the children with our animals. You see how caring they are, right? So they're learning how to be caring, and it comes back to you when you see that in that moment. So
and I think using those examples as teachable moments are incredibly important. So we went through a really, really very physical stage with our little guy. He's 6 now, so we're sort of coming out of it, but very aggressive towards his sibling.
Okay.
And same thing, he's very kind with animals and very nurturing and kind to younger children.
Right.
So I would often say things to him like, I noticed, here's the curious part of it.
Yes.
I noticed that when you were out today at that barbecue, you were so kind and caring to our friend Gracie, who's 1. That's a really amazing thing that you were able to do. Do you think maybe you could show some of that kindness to your sister?
Yes.
You're drawing children in to them understanding that they are actually already doing it.
Yes.
In a different environment. Now, could you just please be kind to your sister?
Yes.
But it's a really beautiful way of using examples of what your children are actually already doing really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to reflect and acknowledge those times when they're getting things really right. So because that does build up their knowledge and awareness of
And it's
what
giving
is
them that
responsible
feedback.
behaviour?
Yeah, for sure.
It also reminds me of a time in a childcare centre where I was working and doing some placement time. So, and one of the other educators came up to me and said, "What are you doing with this particular girl? Like, she's just completely different." And the only thing I was doing was acknowledging her when she was behaving really well. So she was a troubled child, right? So I just concentrated on when she was doing things right. So amazing how you can see a major turnaround.
And that's what I call the power of positivity, Sonia.
Yes.
And that we have to constantly tell our children the things they are doing right to get them to do more. And what inadvertently happens within negative cycles in families is that we start to all get really caught up in negativity.
Yes.
And we as the adults obviously have to work really hard to be looking and almost like flipping the script on that and constantly looking for the positive things.
Yes.
And that's what I mean about therapeutic parenting being a very specific way of thinking, because when I've done work with families, they often say to me it almost like takes a conscious thought for them to stop and think, okay, how am I going to change the way that I say this? But the more you do it, the more you practice it, the easier it becomes, obviously.
Very true. So talking about how to expand that sort of communication and share information that 3 ways between the school and the parent and the child, do you have any advice to parents in that area? Because you would have obviously had to have communicated with your children's schools. So what advice do you have?
I'm a really big believer in being open and transparent. There's a bit of debate in the adoption and permanent care community about whether you disclose about your children's background and how much and all that sort of stuff. And I would definitely say, as I'm getting older, not me, sorry, my children are getting older, I'm becoming a lot more conscious of that it's their story to tell.
Yeah.
In terms of, the really personal information that we deliver to them incrementally as they grow. But in terms of with education, I can't stress enough for anyone watching this who is early on in their adoptive and permanent care journey, as someone who has lived through this in a really negative way, please look for a school that is trauma informed, either in Australia trained in the Berry Street model, or look at their behaviour, positive behaviour, school-wide strategy that they use, and look at their values and how they teach their children or their students those life skills. Because those are the foundations that the school will be basing everything to do with behaviour around. And trust me, as much as we all want to wave a magic wand and think our child's is going to go into education and not have challenges.
Yes.
My research and obviously experience tells me that many, many of our adoptive and permanent care children struggle once they hit formal learning. Because our system is so rigid. That's another podcast. But we think we've come a long way in education in terms of being more inclusive, classroom practices, and understanding of neurodiversity. But I'm here to tell you we've still got a long way to go.
Yes.
So the more open we can be in terms of sharing what we know about our kids, and especially about trauma, really. Like, they don't need to know the ins and outs of our kids' birth stories. They just need to know what trauma looks like in a classroom.
Yes.
Right?
And know that there are different schools that approach it differently. So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
And remember that, our educators who are on the front line with our kids are only as good as the school leaders. So the challenge that we often have in schools is that one year we might get a teacher who really connects and understands and our children thrive with.
Yes.
And the next year it all falls apart because they're not getting the same support or the same empathy or the same approach or sense of humour or whatever it might be, right?
Yes.
So I think, if I had my time again, I was telling you this, Sonia, I was saying absolutely imperative that you choose a school that is trained in trauma approaches and has it embedded as their philosophy, and they have been practicing it for a while, because it will go a long way when your child does start to display some challenging behaviours, and about how they approach that.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% with you on that one. So And I guess the other thing is, for a lot of families, a lot of these children who have experienced trauma do find it very challenging to sort of maybe lean into their emotions and identify what's going on for them. So, perhaps talking about it is hard. Certainly
Very
there's
hard.
evidence in terms of what's going on with their body. So do you have any advice for parents and carers in that area?
I certainly do.
Yeah, great.
And it's what I call optimal learning time, or finding the teachable moment. And the number one thing we know, and I've seen this with my own little guy, because I do this stuff all the time, he's so smart too. He's like, are you trying to talk to me about this because of X, Y, and Z? Or, he's all over me, Sonia. You know what I mean? A lot of therapist parents say their kids are the same because we do the talk sort of thing. But
yes.
The way that we bring up things or approach things with our children is incredibly important. So picking the right moment, and a couple of my really all-time winners are in the car, when they don't have to look at you and they can look out the window and you can have a really beautiful conversation. One of the challenges and one of the things I really want people to think about is, children aren't like adults. Their brains are not fully functioned. They don't want to sit down and workshop it. They don't want to sit down and look at me, talk to me, look me in the eye, all that sort of language that will just put that wall shut down, right?
Yes.
So we want to come in and have the teaching and the our words to get in, I suppose, is what I'm saying. And we need to make sure that we're picking the time when their brains are open to hearing and their senses are down.
Yes.
Because one of the biggest things about trauma kids is they protect.
Yes.
They protect. I'm going to put my wall up. I'm going to lock you out. I'm going to shut you out because you're going to break my heart, just like what happened to me before.
Yes.
And why are you different to anyone else?
Yes.
Right? And that's what we've got to keep just chipping away at that, don't we? That little wall that they put up.
Chip away. Yes.
And the other really, playing with them, kicking the footy, going on a bike ride where you're side by side. I find anything parallel where you don't have to actually look at them really, really great when you're doing an activity together. Storytelling is another one of my all-time favorites. There's so many books with incredible messages in them that can lead to really great conversations.
Yes.
And picking, I can't stress enough, right then and there in the behaviour or after an incident is never the right time to bring it up, to workshop it.
Yeah. Really good point.
Yeah,
absolutely. People, when they're heated, don't respond well. So it reminds me of doing lots of cooking and conversations when plaiting hair, child in front, maybe watching TV, braiding hair or that type of thing. So that's when you have these great conversations, when you're not kind of necessarily eye to eye. So that's a good
and
point.
I think trying to avoid questions, I say to families too, when children are dysregulated, why did you do that? Why are you angry? What's going on? A lot of the time our kids actually can't articulate that. They're just flooded, they flip their lid, their brain is dysregulated. They actually don't, and sometimes they actually don't even know why they've done it, and asking questions is not really helpful because it just creates more tension and angst and sometimes keeps our kids stuck there in the emotion when our job is to, put the fire out, not make the fire spread.
Yeah, absolutely. So how do you balance between various aspects of one's emotions? So, for example, affect in terms of overall disposition of the child, so whether they're disinterested or clingy, the family dynamic, so you've got relationships with parents, siblings, and maybe others, perceiving or interpreting emotions, expressing and integrating emotions, understanding emotions, and managing emotions for personal growth. How do you kind of balance between all those dynamics going on? So
there's a lot of layers there and questions there, but I'll try and do a broad sweeping answer, I suppose. And I think it really comes back to be a family that talks about your feelings. Be a family that accepts and expresses and displays a range of emotions. Even being angry as an adult is a very real emotion. So I think it's incredibly important that our children see us expressing a range of emotions in a safe, contained way, obviously. You know, my kids have been using the word frustrated since they could talk. Mummy, are you frustrated? Yes, I am, you know. And I think that this is, you know, this really big part of my philosophy is that life is not perfect. Families are noisy. Families are loud. Families make mistakes. Families argue. Families make up. You know, families have fun. That is all part of being a part of a family. And I think it's incredibly important that our children feel that as well. And that comes back to that acceptance, doesn't it? Is that we're all different. We all have good days. We all have bad days. You know, I tucked my kids into bed the other night. It's been a bit of a grump, I think, on that day. You know, and I am the first person to own up when I've been angry or I've got shouty or, you know, I've lost control, and I will always apologize to my children every time. I'm so sorry I got angry. I'm going to try better tomorrow. And they always say, that's okay, Mummy.
Yes.
You know? And it's so beautiful. My daughter said back to me, she goes, it's okay, Mummy. I get angry at you sometimes, but we still love each other. You know?
Gorgeous. Yes.
Because it is that, isn't it? Like that, it's as much as we wish we couldn't ever get to that point. We do reach our threshold. And, you know, trauma families in particular have a lot more going on than, you know, neurotypical families, and so we do deal with a lot more.
Yes.
But I feel like it's a really big part of our approach and teaching our children is that we all still love each other unconditionally, even when we get angry, you know.
Yes.
And talking about our feelings and sharing our emotions. And I can think of a really beautiful example of when we lost my husband's nana, and he was crying, and, you know, she was 88, so she, you know, she was pretty old, but we had this really beautiful teaching moment with our children where Dad and I were crying, you know, and expressing sadness. And a lot of dads in particular say to me, I walk away so I don't get angry.
Okay. Yes.
And I feel like there's a real strength in modeling controlled anger to your children, because, you know, we deal with a lot of aggression, don't we, with trauma kids?
Yes.
And there's a part of that that's really unhealthy and really negative, because we don't ever want our children to be physical, you know. And that is one of my big missions, is, you know, is to teach our children that it's okay for you to feel angry, but it is never okay for you to physically hurt somebody.
Yes.
You know.
Yeah.
And part of my job is to keep you safe and to keep our family safe. And you're allowed to be angry, but I will never let you hurt me. And I feel like this is something that a lot of trauma families really struggle with kids when they're really in that heated behaviour and the physical stuff of knowing how to support their children through that.
Yes. And it's
Would you
okay to
agree?
cry as well.
Yeah. For sure.
So how do you make that a richer environment at home with a fuller emotional literacy? Because I think we all kind of understand happy, sad, frustrated, angry. How do you make that richer? Because there's so many more kind of emotions that we can.
Well, for children in particular, it comes back to facial expressions. So like really detailed work around the eyes, the eyebrows, the mouth, the teeth, the color of your face, you know, like we used to do a lot of mirror work with kids where we'd all have a mirror. And if you haven't got a mirror in your kid's room, I highly recommend going out and doing that immediately, because, you know, looking at themselves and is a really big part of them understanding their identity. And the three steps of it really teaching emotional regulation and emotional literacy is, first of all, naming the emotion, which we, as you said, a lot of kids can do: happy, mad, sad. The next step is have the physical response, so how it makes you behave.
Okay.
Do you know what I mean? So when you're, you know, when you're embarrassed, your cheeks might go red, or, you know, when you're nervous, you get that, oh, that really icky feeling in your tummy, you know. Or I know with my little guy, he has anxiety, you know, I would put his hand on his heart and say, oh my goodness, your heartbeat is racing. You're feeling nervous right now, and that's okay. And so you're linking children into the physical response. Well, because, you know, like I said earlier, a lot of behavior is inferred. It's a feeling. It's a knot in your stomach. You know, And I think that over exaggerating some of those things for our kids, like I'm a very animated kind of person, I'm a very emotive. People always say that to me, you're very engaging because you're very emotive when you speak and that sort of stuff. But like almost like going over the top with it, I think, especially when kids are young, helps them understand that.
Yes.
And then the third step is knowing what to do with the emotion. So it's really complicated, isn't it? It's any wonder our kids struggle with it. And it's any wonder adults struggle with it.
Yes.
And it doesn't so much of it comes back to our ability to have self-awareness.
Yes, very much so. Yes. But also maybe it's that role modeling what we do when we're in those moments. So I'm going out for a walk because I'm just in that, I'm getting into a fog. I'm just going to go for a walk. So
and I've said things like, you know what, I can feel myself getting really frustrated right now. I'm going to move away so that I don't get angry.
Yes.
Those sorts of things, and explicitly saying out loud. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of parents don't do when it comes to explicit teaching. So like, if you're talking about with the brain care stuff, I will say out loud, oh, gee, I'm thirsty. My brain needs some water. I'm going to have a drink. Rather than just going to get a drink.
Yes.
So that's that modeling that I mean to our children, or, that ability to check back in. And I say, oh, gee, I'm getting a bit grumpy, aren't I? Why don't I think I've eaten? I think I need some food. Who's hungry? Let's feed our brains, and connecting that back to self so that your children then start to make those connections too.
Yeah, good point. So I think sometimes it's really challenging to also sit in with the child and lean into their emotions. And certainly I've had that experience, particularly if it brings up really strong emotions.
Oh, yes.
For yourself. I think it's also why psychologists, have that supervision built into their role. They get time out from the workspace to reflect on how their work is affecting them. So, and we don't always have that opportunity as carers and parents to have that sort of self-care. So, so how do you lean in and sit with a traumatized child when you might be feeling that?
That's a really good point, because I lived through this with my little guy, especially in that really peak challenging tantrum meltdown phase I was talking about earlier. But
yes,
I feel like sometimes in that moment just being there is enough. You don't have to talk. You don't have to say anything. I remember sometimes when we were having meltdown after meltdown after meltdown, and I just had nothing, Sonia. Like I was so emotionally depleted.
Yes.
I could just rationally say to myself, prefrontal cortex, prefrontal cortex. And I would literally just sit with him.
Right.
And just allow my breath to do the work.
Okay.
You know what I mean? So, and I feel like because that's really what our children need in that moment, is they need to feel that safety. They need to feel that connection, even though that's the last place we feel like being right then and there when you're so depleted yourself.
Yes.
Sometimes just being there, rocking, humming, not actually, doing much, just to try and regulate that brain to move on, to get ready for the next one.
Yes.
And so important that we try and get those breaks as well. And, I'm not sure, and I feel like a lot of this does sometimes come back to the mums as well, because our children are really looking for that maternal connection. And I would find sometimes with our relationship, my hubby was amazing. He'd try, but it just wouldn't have the same effect. So making sure we get breaks from our children is incredibly important for adoptive and permanent care families to be able to be that emotionally present parent that they need.
Yes. Okay. Is there anything else you wanted to comment on today?
Oh, I don't know. I feel like it's, I think we're told before we go into this process that it's going to be hard and it's challenging, but I don't think you can really understand that until you're living it. And I really want to implore to any families that are struggling to reach out for help, to access support, try and get some respite if you can. We've just linked up with someone who's going to come and take our little guy out for a few hours every week. And none of that is a sign of weakness. None of that is a sign of you not being good enough.
Yes.
It's actually about you understanding what your kids need.
Yes.
So it's actually a strength. And I feel like so much of this journey that we're on is constantly learning and evolving and changing, like all kids, but more so with our kids, I think, as they grow and develop, and advocating. because that's exhausting. That's a really exhausting part of our role.
Oh, for sure.
Isn't it?
So yeah, I mean, it's well documented that, you know, our parents and carers, I think it's 6 hours a week more in parenting because of all those aspects. So so it's
and
a
we're
big
always
load.
looking for ways that we can make our life easier, right?
Yes, correct.
And I think it's really important to remember that we don't have to, you know, our kids don't need fixing. It's just about being understanding and giving the things that we can to them in that moment. But I still truly passionately believe everything comes back. It does. It comes back to our relationship. It
Yes.
comes back to that trust and safety and acceptance of the situation, rather than constantly trying to fix it or make it better.
Yes. Yeah, no, I'm a big believer. One relationship can make an awesome difference in someone's life. So yes, so thank you. It's a really good message for me to take back to work on some of those emotions with my family and continue to lean in. So I think some really good messages there for every single family. So
awesome.
Yeah, thank you. So, and to anyone making the time to listen to this recording, thank you for giving up your valuable time for the benefit of the young people in your life. Until next time, have an amazing week.